Hello, this video is on just getting started and is part of a series on tips on how to instantly improve your drawing. And so let's start with the basics here. You've got your piece of paper, and most people, when they look at this piece of paper, go, well, it's a blank piece of paper. This comes from the idea that there's nothing here, and that a mark of somebody who's a real amateur is they put something right in the middle of the piece of the blank paper. And I can always tell somebody who's an amateur because they put something in the middle of the paper and they either ignore what's going around that object in the paper or they don't know what to do with it. Well, that's because this person is seeing this piece of paper. It's what we call an invisible window. An invisible window is used in realistic art when you see this as though there's nothing there and as though you're looking through this like a sheet of glass and you're seeing a landscape or this type of landscape. And what they want to do is they want to take this blank sheet of paper, and whether it's a portrait or a building, act as though this is blank and clear and you're looking into a landscape or you're looking through a window to see a person. Well, in reality, this humble piece of paper is not blank at all. Now you're thinking, well, I don't see anything. Is this a trick question? But actually, don't you see a shape? I mean, whether I do the shape this way, or I do the shape this way, or whether the paper is shaped this way, I'm first confronted with the idea that, yeah, okay, it's a shape. Not only that, but it's a white shape. This is a rectangle that's filled with white. Now, if I don't see how big the rectangle is and that the surface is actually a flat white surface, I'm going to have a really hard time, because in the first instance of the invisible window, I'm trying to make this look like a house, like there's a house there. When in reality, there is no house. There's just a flat piece of paper that I'm going to cover up with shapes. So in order to see this piece of paper more clearly, you will often see artists who will tape off the format that they're using. And what happens when you do this, I'm using black tape here. Do it carefully like this so that you can see the edge. What's happening when I tape it off is it forces me to see the rectangle that I'm dealing with. And the reason it's a rectangle instead of a square or triangle is because, well, windows are rectangles, and so paper is a rectangle to make you feel like it's an invisible window. Of course, you can make it any shape you want. So when I start taping this off, suddenly that white rectangle pops out. Now, one little trick that I do want to show you on this is that I have taped this paper off to get my format going. It's also very useful because if I'm using charcoal or pastel, then I'll have a clean white edge to work with when I'm done. Computer printer paper is horrible for artwork. It's made for printers. Printers don't erase, printers don't use water, printers don't use charcoal or pastel. This is way too flimsy and is only made for like putting a thin layer of ink on it through a printer. So I would really recommend using art paper. So if I've taped my art paper off like this, later on when I take this tape off, if this is charcoal or pastel, I'll be able to easily hold this with my fingers and not get things dirty. Also, if I want to frame it, I've got a clean white edge to frame it with so that this part that's underneath the mat board that goes on top of it will not dirty it. Here's a little trick though. So I've got this tape and this is the sticky side. If I take two pieces of tape like this, and I'm going to make a way of holding this down. Notice that I put the tape on the back. When I peel this tape off, I may damage this paper a little bit, so I do have to be careful. But what I don't want to do is damage this part that's inside. So what I will do is I will take this piece of paper, this tape, and this is sticky side up. So this is the sticky side. Okay. And then I'm going to take another piece of tape and I'm going to put it sticky side down so that I put my tape on like that. And so if when you're taping down your paper to get the format right, you do it like this, what happens is, whether you tape it off or not, when you get ready to take this off, lift it up from your workspace, it won't tear the front of your paper where the drawing is. It may, if it is going to tear back here. The other thing you can do with this is just take a knife and cut it here and here, and you can just lift it up. So if you were going to tape this piece of paper down, you would just do that on all four sides. Sticky side up, another piece of paper, sticky tape, sticky side down. When you get ready to work with a format like this, one of the things that I really like for you to think about is, now that I can kind of see that white rectangle, it will really help you if you look at the edges, because when I look at a picture like this, I see that the picture goes all the way to the edge. Now I might get caught up in this architectural detail. I might get caught up in this pier, but really when I look at these images, on all of these images, there's something going to the edges. If I looked out the window and I only saw a house with nothing around it, where it was just floating, it would seem very eerie. If I had a portrait of somebody and I looked at them and all I saw was their head in the center of the picture plane, I just saw their head with white around it, it would, you don't see things that way. There's always something that's going to the edge of your field of vision. So one of the things that can be very helpful when you're getting started is to mark off your center point and your corner points like this. And I'm guesstimating, you could measure it. You might know that when you draw with a grid, it's a little bit easier to see, what's going on in each square. Well, this helps you decide on your proportions, almost like you're projecting an imaginary grid on it. That is, if I see a point here and I see a point here, my eye makes a connection there. And so I start getting used to seeing the corners of the paper, which are going to be very important because, for instance, in something like this, I might notice, here we go, I might notice, for instance, that this peak comes to about a third of the way over. So if I make a point, if I divide this into thirds visually, and I have, let's see, I'm a little off, get it right, 1, 2, 3, say, then I know that this comes here. If this is a third of the way down, I can put a point here, and I already have the proportion of that roof starting to make a little sense. Okay. Let me do this with a darker piece of darker pencil so you can see it. So if I know that it's a third of the way here, this comes down about a third of the way here. This is a little higher than that, so this actually would have to come down some. And what I'm doing here is I am looking at, it comes a little bit more than a third. I'm looking at how things touch the edge of the paper. Now, as I get started with this, and I'm just blocking it in with these lines, I can move these lines around, but already I know that whatever I put in here, that this area has to take this area has to take this. So one of the first things you want to do here is you want to really see the format that you're using, and it will surprise you how helpful it is if you take the time to notice where things touch the edge. And that's simply because most people, when they start, are looking in the middle and aren't looking at the edges. If you mark off these edges before you get started, where things touch the edge, it will make your drawing seem fuller and more realistic. Now, as we're talking about this white rectangle and seeing the edges of it on a format, often that will be how you will be able to choose the best picture to use. So for instance, this photograph works well because it's a specifically vertical format. And I might enjoy this format because it seems very tall and building-like. Don't forget you can always crop. And it's a good idea before you get started just to take another piece of paper and block off what your compositional possibilities are. Do you think that the image is stronger like this? Would it be stronger like this? Do you like it like that? To me, this small edge right here is not really very useful. It doesn't tell me very much. I either need to see a little bit more on this side so that I can actually see the landscape that this house is in. But actually, I think, you know, it might be if I'm just interested in the house, I might have something like this. A taller, more vertical format might make me think of this house, being a little bit more stately. That is, it's strong, it's tall, it's, you know, standing tall after all these years. So it's a good idea to figure out what kind of rectangle you want. So whether or not you're using a vertical composition or a horizontal composition, if this right here is equal, so it's equally about the water and the sky. If I wanted to make it more about the water, I might want to crop this like this. If I wanted this to be more about a blue sky, I might crop it a little more. If I want it to seem as though it's a little more adventurous, I might put something a little off kilter. If I want it to seem as though I'm going to jump off this pier, I could easily crop this so that the horizontal format becomes a vertical format. Here I have an example of an image that is decidedly horizontal. And this gets a little bit lost because of all this up here. One of the things you can do when you're getting ready to crop an image artistically to decide, now obviously the photographer's decided this some, but how much of this is unnecessary work? So if this was going to be a drawing or a pastel, this actually is a lot of work to get that to be believable. Is it really helping you, or is it just visual chatter? What happens if I get rid of a little bit of that? Maybe I'll be focusing on what really interests me. Now, this particular piece has some fun compositional possibilities because here I have raw wood, here I have the axe, and here I have the split kindling. And so I get this idea of almost like a comic strip action where I have, you know, these stumps, this action, and this kindling. So in my mind, I'm making an action. Would I get more of a comic strip before and after graphic novel feeling of action if I cropped it, or if I crop it too much? Will I lose the idea that that's an axe? Maybe it's even better if I take a look at what's here that I might be missing because I'm not seeing the edges of the paper. And here I have a complete tree. So if I have a complete tree, then stumps, then the axe, then the kindling, I might actually want to keep this tree in. In fact, I might want to get rid of these bushes here that were just part of the photograph that the photographer worked with. What if I took another tree and maybe flipped it and put it here so that here I have a tree and here I have a tree, and this is like the life of the tree. So your composition can have a lot of meaning to it if you start thinking about this not as a blank piece of paper, but as a shape that you're going to fill up. Now here we have some lovely lotuses, and you could actually make this seem like a landscape by making it more horizontal, I suppose. Or you could make it seem very vertical. So lotuses have this, you may know that lotuses have strong roots, long roots that go down into the water. And I might have this feeling of these lotuses growing up from the water if I have a vertical format. But the other thing I see here is I have a lot of circles. And these circles, as I see them touching the edges, this circle touches the edges if I complete it. This circle may touch the edge if I wanted to crop it a little bit and get some strong shapes in there. I have this circle and this circle. If I have circles, it might be an interesting counterpoint to see if I couldn't make this a little bit more square. So then I have kind of a geometric balance of circles and squares. So I might not like this toothy diamond here. It looks like there's little fangs here of darkness. That might add some excitement because these triangles here, these triangles here, these triangles here add a little bit of sharp edginess to it. But on the other hand, I might want to have this square here. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of some of those daggery like triangles, and this might be a perfect balance between the circle and the square, which might make it seem a little more meditative. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is, what's my format, vertical or horizontal? I also would like to point out that different papers are used for different things. So printer papers might be used for your computer. However, once I start seeing that this is not an invisible window, but that I've got this stage to put the image on, then I can start even questioning that. And here's what I mean. Instead of a white piece of paper on this one, I can see that this is not really white and that it's kind of antiqued. So what I have here is actually an envelope that is cream colored and is approximately the same proportions as this image. Let me get another sheet and I will show you what I mean. So when the student was considering their different options, they have here a very semi-rectangular one, not enough for a landscape. They have a vertical one here, but on both this horizontal and this vertical, it seemed like there was a lot of unnecessary shadows that got in the way, and I wasn't real sure what the landscape was. And this particular piece is cropped very strangely. There's a building in the background, and down here on this edge, it just gets to be murky, whatever you're seeing. And so if you're looking at the building, you might not see this odd shape in the background or this bad shape of a tree. This one right here, because it had a nice verticality, seemed to be me to be the best one. I could clearly see the details. Now, see how this shape and this shape go together? And instead of a white piece of paper, I might want to use a piece of paper like this. This piece of paper is very smooth. And the reason that's going to be important is that when I start working with these lines are going to have to be very, very straight. So if this paper was textured, I might have a difficulty in creating multiple smooth lines on a textured piece of paper. So on something like this, where it's smooth, I know it will take ink or pencil well. I know that it will possibly erase well. I might use a straight edge, anything with a straight edge like that, and start marking that off. So here I have an antique piece of paper. Now on this one here of the chopping wood, you can really play around with color of the paper, texture of the paper, or even what we associate with the paper. And what I mean by that is that I could put this on a white sheet of paper, but if I took a brown paper bag and cut it up, the surface actually takes color pretty darn well. And because this is a recycled type of paper, recycled cardboard could work as well. It could add a note of humor or subtlety for me to use paper that's recycled wood and then draw this thing about wood transforming on a piece of paper like this. Now, sometimes you can save yourself a huge amount of trouble by really not thinking white paper at first. This student wants to do something inspired by this landscape. This is going to be a huge amount of drawing with black pencil or charcoal, and it's going to be very tedious and it probably won't cover very well. If you went out and got some black paper, construction paper, drawing paper, see how this piece is mostly black. So if I were to choose the right color of blue, I might come in here, and as I start drawing these tree shapes in here, you can see immediately that this drawing is going to be effective and take a lot less time than if I was sitting there drawing all of this black and all of this blue. So I will often have students that will, go ahead and do this in pencil or do it in charcoal, and it's kind of tedious and it doesn't look good. And they'll be like, well, I didn't have a piece of black paper. And what I think when I hear stuff like that is, yeah, but you spent 4 hours filling this shape in with a black pencil and it looks horrible. Or you could have spent 1 hour going out to an art store or even a drugstore to get black paper. And, you could be back in your studio within an hour, have a better drawing goes faster, looks better. So when you're looking at your image that you want to draw, just be sure that when you're looking at it, it's like, don't think, oh, this has to be a piece of white paper. Now, this person could also take ink or even black acrylic or tempera and put it on a good piece of white paper. It would have to be kind of sturdy. If you decide to do that, you should get a sponge and get a styrofoam tray and put your ink or your tempera or whatever in the styrofoam tray and wet the sponge with the paint and then squeeze it out and then cover your paper. You don't want your paper to buckle. And if the paper is a multi-purpose paper and you've watered things down here and done it with a sponge, you'll get even coverage so it won't buckle. In the case of acrylic paint, you want to water that down enough so that the surface doesn't feel like plastic. And you can either do that with water or you can pour just like rubbing alcohol on the pile of acrylic, and the rubbing alcohol will cut how plastic that is. So it might be worth it if you had supplies around the house to take a good sheet of white paper and cover it with black, or even cover it with black and deep blue and maybe a little bit of yellow here, and do that with your sponge and then draw on top of it. So this is a black sheet of paper drawing. Now, if you're getting creative with things, you can also open up a lot of creative possibilities with it. So for example, here I have this beautiful scenery of water, and I could go out and get a piece of blue Canson paper, which is just kind of art paper. Another thing I could do, though, is to get some simple wheat paste. This wheat paste is what kids use. You can look online to get recipes for wheat paste. I use a very high grade of wheat paste called methyl cellulose, which you can look up in art supply store catalogs. However, wallpaper paste works great too. And here's what the wallpaper paste can do. So I have a very blue image. Here I have some school grade wheat paste. I'll just take my finger, put it on the wheat paste, cover my paper. Now, when you're doing this, Elmer's glue, white glues don't work because Elmer's glues and white glues form a very stiff surface. And the reason I'm using wallpaper paste or wheat paste is that I'm going to take a thin sheet of tissue paper, craft tissue paper, like you wrap with gifts, okay? Very, very cheap. You can get it pretty easily. And what I'm doing here is I'm rubbing this so that the paper is really smooth. There's no build up of glue anywhere. Okay, it really works well to work from the center out. Then I take this piece of tissue paper, put it down here, smooth it on top. And what's nice about the wheat paste is that it dries clear, and it doesn't leave a film, so that almost all art supplies, whether it's pastels or pencils, can go on top of it. You can get a slight texture and you can work that texture out, but sometimes the texture is really kind of nice, organic feel for your imagery. Now, in addition to doing just a plain sheet of tissue, I mean, you could do this with black too if you wanted to on that previous example. Do this, let it dry, take off this edge here, and I've got a beautiful piece of blue paper, which will make this go really, really quickly. You can play around with that idea a lot. And I'm going to just real quickly rub some of this on here. You don't have to use just one solid sheet of paper. Whether I use white paper, cream colored paper, brown paper bag, I can add to those papers as well and just get rid of this idea of the white rectangle, which sometimes can kind of hold you up creatively. So for example, if I were to take some very nice thin blue tissue paper, that's all this is, and I might even want to build it up just a little bit, so I'm taking more of this glue. Here we go. And I'm going to make this a little bluer. Now on this paper, it happens to be variegated, blue on one side, a little whiter on the other side. Then I might take another sheet of tissue paper. Let me smooth that out. Re-wet this with my wheat paste. Wheat paste is extremely cheap. You know, they use it, little kids use it in kindergarten. Make finger paints by adding paint to it. Okay. Now I'm going to take another piece of green here. This is a very thin sheet of green tissue. I'm going to put that right here. And I'm not going to worry about making it too perfect right now because I'm trying to do a very quick demonstration. If this was my artwork, obviously I would take some time and go a little bit more slowly. Now, as I'm building up some thin strips of almost collage-like material, I am using the wheat paste or the wallpaper paste to smooth it back down, okay? Wallpaper paste works really well because it's intended to bond one sheet of paper to another. And so when I use wallpaper paste, it'll bond these sheets together. Vinyl wallpaper paste doesn't work very well. So look for non-vinyl wallpaper paste, okay? Sometimes it comes as a powder and it looks kind of like plain gelatin. And I might add water to it, just like gelatin, it thickens. Wheat paste can be the same way. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of just breaking up the white piece of paper by having something, you know, a little more interesting to start with. Now you might start seeing a small landscape emerge from there, and I'm going to take a few more colors here. Now, yeah, this is collage. However, you don't have to start with a blank sheet of white paper in order to get started, okay? So this is the kind of a surface where you could actually draw into this, add using pastel or using pencil. So for example, this piece could be a very beautiful drawing, but you've got some real delicacy in here. So do I want to, for instance, take some pastel powder and rub some pastel powder here? Do I want to break this up with some splashes of watercolor before I begin? Would these flowers look more mysterious if I did start with a black sheet of paper and then build this color on top of it? Do I want to take a black sheet of paper, cut out some white forms, glue the white piece of paper down, affix the white piece of paper down with wallpaper paste or wheat paste, and then draw on top of that? There's nothing that says you can't start with a white piece of paper and just jump in and do that just by looking at the edges. But there's so many creative possibilities when you stop seeing that as a blank sheet of paper. All right, let's see what you can do with just starting with your piece of paper.